August 19, 1944. Falaise-Argenton Road, Normandy. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows as Wehrmacht Oberst Friedrich Kellner raised his binoculars to observe his convoy's progress. What he recorded in his leather-bound logbook over the next 12 minutes would have earned him immediate court-martial for defeatism if discovered by the SS security officers attached to his unit. The vehicles are being annihilated, not by the heavy bombers we can hear approaching from miles away, not by the artillery we can locate and counter, but by something that appears from nowhere and vanishes before our flak guns can even traverse to target them. They come so low the drivers can see the pilots' faces. Then everything burns. Kellner commanded a fuel convoy of 47 trucks carrying desperately needed gasoline for the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. The division's Tiger tanks sat motionless 30 kilometers away, their fuel gauges reading empty, waiting for supplies that would never arrive. Through his binoculars, Kellner watched the lead truck suddenly erupt in flames. No explosion preceded it, just streams of light from above, then fire. The attack came from 8 P-47 Thunderbolts of the 362nd Fighter Group, though Kellner would never learn their designation. They descended from 6,000 feet in a coordinated diving attack, their 850 caliber machine guns creating a convergence of destruction 30 feet wide. Each aircraft fired for less than 3 seconds per pass. In those 3 seconds, 1,600 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition found their targets. Kellner ordered his drivers to scatter, but the narrow Norman roads offered no escape. Trucks attempting to reach the tree line became trapped in ditches. Those reversing collided with vehicles behind them. The fighters worked with methodical precision, making pass after pass. They ignored the frantically firing flak wagon at the convoy's rear, its 20mm cannons unable to track targets moving at 350 miles per hour merely 50 feet above the ground. 12 minutes after the first pass, Kellner stood among the wreckage of his entire convoy. Black smoke columns rose into the Norman sky, visible for 20 kilometers. The burning gasoline created rivers of fire along the roadside ditches. 16 of his drivers were dead, their bodies charred beyond recognition. 20 more lay wounded, many with burns that would prove fatal without medical treatment that couldn't reach them. The thousands of gallons of fuel meant to power the Wehrmacht's counterattack instead burned uselessly into the morning air. What Oberst Kellner didn't know, what the entire German high command wouldn't fully comprehend until after the war, was that his convoy's destruction represented just one small part of the most devastating yet least understood air campaign of the European theater. The systematic annihilation of German ground forces by American P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers conducting low-level strafing runs would ultimately claim 86,000 vehicles. This invisible campaign would cripple the Wehrmacht's ability to maneuver, supply its divisions, and wage modern mechanized warfare. Each burning truck on that Norman road was another nail in the coffin of German military mobility. The transformation of American fighters into tank and truck killers had been building since early 1944, though its roots stretched back to the previous year. Major General Elwood Pete Quesada, commander of 9 Tactical Air Command, had watched heavy bombers attempt to interdict German supply lines with disappointing results. A 1,000-bomber raid might destroy a rail yard, but the Germans would have it operating again within days. Meanwhile, trucks simply drove around the craters. Quesada's calculations, presented to General Eisenhower in January 1944, revealed a startling truth. One P-47 Thunderbolt carrying 850 caliber machine guns could destroy more vehicles per sortie than a B-17 Flying Fortress dropping 6,000 pounds of bombs. The fighter accomplished this at 1/10 the cost and without risking a 10-man bomber crew. The mathematics were irrefutable. A P-47 could put 2,000 rounds into a target area the size of a tennis court. A bomber might miss the entire road. The initial resistance came from the fighter pilots themselves. They had joined the Army Air Forces to become aces, to engage in aerial combat like the knights of old. Shooting trucks seemed beneath them. Colonel Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group voiced what many felt when he complained that they were being turned into glorified strafing machines. "We didn't train for years to hunt supply wagons," he told Quesada. The general's response was blunt. "You kill more Germans destroying one fuel truck than shooting down one fighter. Which serves victory better?" April 15, 1944 marked the first systematic implementation of Quesada's vision. 12 P-47s from the 365th Fighter Group attacked German convoys near Cannes instead of seeking aerial combat with the Luftwaffe fighters sent to intercept them. The German pilots watched in confusion as the Americans ignored them completely, diving past to attack vehicles on the roads below. Luftwaffe pilot Wilhelm Hoffmann later recalled his bewilderment. "We offered them combat, but they preferred to shoot trucks. We thought they were cowards. We didn't realize they were winning the war." By day's end, 127 German vehicles lay destroyed along Norman roads. The after-action reports revealed the devastating effectiveness of the new tactics. Each P-47's 8 machine guns, when fired in a shallow dive, created overlapping fields of fire that shredded everything in a path 30 feet wide and 200 feet long. Trucks, half-tracks, even light tanks couldn't withstand the concentrated firepower. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds ignited fuel tanks, detonated ammunition, and turned vehicles into funeral pyres for their occupants. The German reaction evolved from confusion to alarm. A captured Wehrmacht report from late April described the new threat. "The American fighters no longer seek combat in the skies. They hunt our vehicles like wolves pursuing deer. Every road is a killing ground. Movement in daylight has become suicide. We are being forced to operate like a 19th century army, moving only under cover of darkness." By May 1944, the statistics showed exponential growth in the strafing campaign's effectiveness. P-47 groups were destroying over 300 vehicles daily. The Germans attempted various countermeasures, all failing against the speed and violence of the attacks. Vehicles traveled in smaller groups to minimize losses, but this slowed movement to a crawl. They increased flak protection, but the mobile anti-aircraft guns couldn't track the fast-moving fighters. Most desperately, they began moving primarily at night, quadrupling the time required to reinforce critical sectors. The Wehrmacht was learning that controlling the ground meant nothing if you couldn't move across it. The technological superiority of the P-47 Thunderbolt created a mismatch the Germans could never overcome. The N/APS-13 tail warning radar allowed American pilots to detect approaching enemy fighters while focused on ground targets. This small device, mounted in the tail, gave pilots a crucial 5-second warning when Luftwaffe interceptors closed from behind. Those 5 seconds meant the difference between completing a strafing run and being shot down. The K-14 gyroscopic gun sight revolutionized accuracy in ground attack. Unlike traditional ring sights, the K-14 computed lead angles automatically, accounting for the aircraft's speed, angle of dive, and target movement. Pilots no longer needed to guess where to aim. They simply placed the glowing reticle on a truck and fired. The sight did the mathematics, ensuring that bullets and target met with lethal precision. The Thunderbolt's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,300 horsepower with water injection, gave pilots a critical escape capability. After a strafing run brought them within range of German flak, pilots could climb at rates the enemy hadn't thought possible. Wehrmacht anti-aircraft gunner Kurt Zimmermann described watching P-47s pull out of their attack dives. They would come down like falling stones, guns blazing, then somehow climb away faster than we could traverse our guns. By the time we aimed where they were already gone. The 8 Browning M2 machine guns represented firepower concentration unmatched by any other fighter. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute, creating a combined rate of 6,400 rounds per minute. The convergence pattern, typically set at 300 yards, focused the storm of metal into a zone where nothing could survive. The standard ammunition load mixed armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds in a deadly combination that could penetrate engine blocks, ignite fuel, and mark targets for following aircraft. Self-sealing fuel tanks gave P-47's survivability that amazed German pilots. The tanks used layers of rubber that swelled when punctured by bullets, sealing small holes before significant fuel loss occurred. German 20mm cannons, deadly to other aircraft, often failed to bring down thunderbolts. Luftwaffe ace Walter Schuck recalled his frustration. "I put 30 cannon rounds into a P-47 over Cannes. I saw them hitting, saw pieces flying off. It simply flew away trailing a little smoke." These planes were flying tanks. The German attempts at countermeasures revealed their technological disadvantage. Their standard flak wagon, the Wirbelwind with 4 20mm cannons, could traverse at 40 degrees per second. A P-47 in a strafing run crossed their field of fire in less than 2 seconds. The mathematics of interception were impossible. By the time gunners identified the threat, computed the lead angle, and traversed their weapons, the attack was over. Wehrmacht engineers attempted various camouflage techniques, but American pilots had been trained to spot the smallest irregularities. Tank tracks in dust, oil stains on roads, even worn grass from repeated parking revealed hidden vehicles. Smoke screens, deployed desperately during attacks, often marked locations rather than concealing them. The smoke told following pilots exactly where to concentrate their fire. The technological gap extended beyond hardware. American pilots received detailed briefings with aerial reconnaissance photos updated daily. They knew which roads the Germans used, where vehicles clustered, when convoys moved. German forces, increasingly blind without aerial reconnaissance, could only react to attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. The systematic destruction of German supply lines created cascading failures throughout the Wehrmacht's operational structure. Panzer Lehr Division, one of Germany's elite armored formations, reported losing 84 fuel trucks in a single week of June 1944. Without fuel, their sophisticated Tiger and Panther tanks became immobile steel bunkers. Tank commanders watched helplessly as their vehicles were abandoned one by one along Norman roads, not from enemy fire but from empty fuel tanks. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich experienced even greater degradation. Their ammunition deliveries fell by 73% between June and July. Artillery batteries received allocation for 10 rounds per gun per day, down from their normal 100. Infantry companies ran out of mortar shells during critical engagements. The division's after-action report stated bluntly that combat effectiveness had declined not from casualties but from inability to resupply forward positions. Food supplies created another crisis. Thousands of tons of rations sat in rear depots while frontline troops subsisted on whatever they could scavenge from Norman farms. Supply officers calculated that moving food during daylight meant losing 60% of trucks to air attack. Night movement reduced losses but quadrupled delivery time. By the time supplies reached the front, units had often been forced to withdraw or had been overrun. Medical supplies presented the most heartbreaking shortage. Field hospitals ran out of morphine, bandages, and surgical instruments. Wounded soldiers who might have survived with proper treatment died from infection and blood loss. A captured German medical officer testified that they were forced to operate without anesthesia and reuse bandages from the dead. The P-47s weren't just killing trucks. They were condemning wounded men to unnecessary death. The destruction of the French railroad network multiplied these problems exponentially. By August 1944, P-47s had destroyed or damaged 12,000 locomotives. The French rail system operated at 8% of its pre-invasion capacity. The Germans attempted to move supplies by rail at night, but pilots learned to attack switching yards at dawn and dusk, catching trains before they could disperse or find cover. Railway workers became increasingly reluctant to operate trains. French resistance members reported that German threats couldn't overcome the fear of American fighters. Engineers would deliberately delay departures, claim mechanical problems, or simply disappear. Those who did work moved trains at minimal speed, ready to jump at the first sound of aircraft engines. The Wehrmacht's command and control structure collapsed under targeted attacks on communications vehicles. P-47 pilots had been trained to identify radio-equipped command vehicles by their distinctive antenna arrays. 1,200 such vehicles were destroyed between June and August. Field commanders lost contact with their units. Orders took hours or days to reach the front lines. Coordinated operations became impossible. The strafing of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's staff car on July 17 demonstrated that no one was safe from the roving fighters. Rommel's driver spotted two P-47s approaching and tried to reach tree cover. The fighters caught the car in open ground, their machine guns wounding Rommel so severely he never returned to active command. The psychological impact rippled through the German officer corps. If Rommel could be hit, anyone could be. Battalion commanders found themselves isolated from their divisions, unable to report their situations or receive orders. The Wehrmacht reverted to World War I communication methods, using motorcycle couriers and runners. These messengers became targets themselves, picked off by roaming fighters. A simple message that would have taken minutes by radio now took hours or days to deliver, if it arrived at all. Strategic reserves couldn't respond to Allied breakthroughs because they couldn't move in daylight. Units ordered to counterattack arrived piecemeal, exhausted from night marches, without their heavy equipment. The famous German ability to rapidly concentrate forces for counteroffensives disappeared under the constant threat of air attack. Behind the operational statistics lay human tragedy on a scale that touched every level of German forces. 18-year-old Wehrmacht conscripts, many drafted just weeks before, found themselves trapped in burning vehicles with no escape. The lucky ones died instantly when 50 caliber rounds tore through truck cabs. Others burned alive as fuel tanks erupted, their screams heard above the roar of flames. Survivors described the horror of pulling charred bodies from vehicles, often unable to identify their comrades. Horse-drawn artillery units suffered particularly horrific casualties. The Germans had increasingly relied on horses as fuel shortages worsened. A single strafing pass would leave dozens of animals dead or writhing in agony alongside their human handlers. Wehrmacht veteran Otto Bergmann recalled finding an entire artillery battery destroyed on a road near Argenton. The horses had been cut to pieces by machine gun fire. Some were still alive, trying to stand on shattered legs. The gunners lay among them, boys from my hometown. We had to shoot the wounded horses while stepping over dead friends. Medical convoys marked with Red Cross symbols offered no protection. P-47 pilots, attacking at 350 miles per hour from 50 feet altitude, couldn't distinguish medical vehicles from military transport. Even when pilots recognized the markings, momentum carried their fire across entire convoys. A captured German medical officer testified that they lost 40% of their ambulances to air attack. Wounded soldiers who survived the battlefield died on roads supposedly protected by international law. French civilians caught in strafing zones added another dimension to the tragedy. Over 4,000 French citizens died from American fighter attacks, most while fleeing combat areas. Entire families were cut down on roads they had traveled for generations. The liberation they had prayed for came with a deadly price paid in innocent blood. The psychological impact on German forces exceeded even the physical destruction. Wehrmacht soldiers developed what medical officers called jaboneurosis, named after their term for fighter bombers. Symptoms included uncontrollable shaking at the sound of aircraft, inability to sleep, and complete paralysis during daylight hours. Entire units became combat ineffective without ever engaging enemy ground forces. Diary entries captured after the war revealed the depth of psychological trauma. Unteroffizier Heinrich Müller wrote that death from above became our constant companion. We listened for engines every moment. The sound of any aircraft, even our own, sent men diving for ditches. We aged years in weeks. Young soldiers arrived confident and were broken within days. They learned that skill and courage meant nothing against an enemy you never saw coming. Truck drivers faced the worst odds. Their life expectancy dropped to 3 weeks by July 1944. Wehrmacht records showed desperate attempts to find replacement drivers as veterans refused missions. Some chose court-martial over certain death. Others deliberately crashed their vehicles to avoid assignments. One transportation officer reported that drivers were drawing lots to determine who would make supply runs, treating each mission as a death sentence. The fear transcended rank and experience. Hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk, broke under the strain of constant air attack. They told their officers that fighting the Russians was better than this helplessness. At least against tanks and infantry you could fight back. Against the Jabos you could only die. The magnitude of the P-47 ground attack campaign can be measured in stark statistics that reveal both its devastating efficiency and strategic impact. American pilots flew 42,000 strafing sorties between April 1944 and May 1945. These missions expended 135 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, enough bullets to kill every German soldier in France several times over. Yet the real devastation came not from killing men but from destroying their means to fight. The vehicle destruction tallies staggered even American commanders who ordered the missions. 56,000 trucks lay burned out along European roads. 9,000 tanks and armored vehicles, many of Germany's finest Panthers and Tigers, were destroyed not in epic tank battles but by fighters they couldn't engage. 12,000 locomotives, the backbone of German logistics, were left as twisted steel monuments to air power. 9,000 horse-drawn vehicles represented the Wehrmacht's desperate regression to 19th-century transport. The total of 86,000 vehicles destroyed exceeded all pre-war estimates of German motor transport production. The cost efficiency stunned military economists. Each vehicle destroyed cost American taxpayers $127 in ammunition and fuel. The same result from strategic bombing would have cost $3,400. The loss rate for P-47s conducting these missions stood at 0.7%, compared to 4.2% for heavy bombers attacking industrial targets. Each P-47 loss to enemy action had destroyed an average of 247 vehicles before its destruction. The mathematics of attrition guaranteed German defeat. They couldn't build vehicles faster than P-47s destroyed them. They couldn't train drivers faster than fighters killed them. They couldn't move supplies faster than Americans interdicted them. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, provided the most damning assessment during his post-war interrogation. The P-47s made all movement impossible. We couldn't conduct mobile warfare with horses and oxen. You destroyed not just our vehicles but our ability to wage modern war. We became a medieval army fighting a 20th-century enemy. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of blitzkrieg warfare, admitted the irony of Germany's defeat. We invented mobile warfare, the integration of tanks and aircraft. You Americans perfected it and turned it against us. The P-47s gave you blitzkrieg in reverse. Instead of tanks supported by aircraft, you had aircraft that made tanks irrelevant. Hermann Göring, once boastful about his Luftwaffe, confessed during his Nuremberg imprisonment that the war's outcome became clear when American fighters stopped hunting German planes and started hunting trucks. I knew then we had lost. You could rebuild factories, replace pilots, but you couldn't move anything anywhere. An army that cannot move cannot fight. Field Marshal Walter Model, known as Hitler's fireman for his defensive expertise, wrote in his final report before suicide that every road had become a death trap. The Jabos see everything, destroy everything. We issue orders that cannot be executed because units cannot move to carry them out. We are not being defeated in battle. We are being strangled by aircraft we never see until they are killing us. The campaign remained largely unknown to the American public because it lacked the drama of strategic bombing or fighter aces. No gun camera footage of trucks burning could compete with images of B-17s over Berlin. Pilots who destroyed 100 vehicles received less recognition than those who shot down 2 enemy fighters. The P-47 groups that paralyzed the Wehrmacht operated in relative obscurity. The Germans never knew what hit them, and that ultimately was the point.